This lecture summarizes several exemptions available to companies looking to raise funds from investors without having to incur the costs and administrative burdens involved in registering securities with the SEC. The registration exemption that's commonly used by venture capitalists and other wealthy investors is known as Regulation D. This is available for private placements rather than public offerings. Generally speaking, you're not allowed to solicit and market the shares or other securities to the general public. But under Regulation D, you are able to raise funding from individuals and organizations that qualify as accredited investors. A Regulation A offering is like a mini IPO for small companies and allows for solicitation to the public as well as accredited investors. However, the amount of funds that can be raised under a Regulation A offering is capped at $5 million. Like an IPO, the process involves the filing of a form with the SEC, and there are restrictions on when offers can be made to investors. But unlike a registered public offering, Regulation A investors enjoy the benefit of a 20-day cooling-off period. Insiders such as founders and managers can sell their own shares to the public under a Regulation A offering, but the maximum amount that can be raised is $1.5 million from the total $5 million cap. Another exemption allows companies to raise funds from overseas investors. Regulation S provides a safe harbor for selling securities to buyers outside the United States. To qualify, it's important that there are no selling efforts inside the United States. It's also important that the securities stay outside the country after they're sold. Flowback is a concern for the SEC. There are no restrictions on the wealth or sophistication of the overseas investors or the amount of money that can be raised in this way. You may be exempt from federal registration if you confine your activities and investor fundraising efforts to a single U.S. state. To qualify, the company must be registered in the state, and all, or a predominant amount of its activities must be inside the state. The sale of securities must be to residents, and they must then stay within the state, i.e. they can't be subsequently resold to out-of-staters. Take note here. One single sale or even an offer of a sale outside of the state invalidates the whole exemption. And remember that although you may be exempt from federal registration, you're still bound by state securities laws. Under Rule 144A, large buyers of securities can resell without registering with the SEC. The exemption applies to qualified institutional buyers. That means investors with more than $100 million in assets. So this exemption is not available to companies issuing shares, dealers, or other share sales as part of the distribution of the original offering. Rule 144A is often combined with the Regulation D private placement to sell and subsequently resell unregistered securities in the United States. So the sale of company shares and other securities requires registration or a valid exemption. Exemptions are available for private placements to accredited investors, sale to overseas buyers, and resale by large wealthy institutions. Clearly, the federal regulations and the registration requirements are aimed at protecting small U.S. investors. Registration without exemption would prevent most startups ever raising the funding they need to get off the ground. So the rules create carve-outs for sales by smaller companies to individuals and organizations that are so sophisticated that they don't need the protection of the SEC. Selling shares and other securities is a legal minefield demanding expert navigation. The costs and penalties resulting from a misstep are considerable. So it's important to make sure that your lawyers are experienced in this field if you want to raise funds without triggering the requirement of SEC registration.